I feel like I'm on top of the world.
Hey, Jack, I feel like I'm flying.
You want to take it from the story, just so we all know where we are? All right.
Few movies in history have earned the legendary status of Titanic. More than 2 decades after its release, James Cameron's masterpiece is still considered one of the greatest films ever made. Audiences continue to admire its breathtaking visuals, emotional storytelling, and incredible attention to historical detail. Every costume, every hallway, every piece of furniture was carefully recreated to make viewers feel as if they had stepped aboard the real RMS Titanic. Yet even a film praised for perfection isn't completely flawless. No matter how much time and money Hollywood spends on a production, tiny mistakes can still slip through the editing room. Some happen because scenes are filmed weeks apart. Others appear when different camera angles from separate takes are combined into a single sequence. And sometimes modern filmmaking techniques accidentally reveal themselves for just a split second. Most viewers never notice these details because they're focused on the emotion of the story. But once someone points them out, they're impossible to ignore. Let's begin with one of the most surprising continuity mistakes hidden during one of the movie's most intense rescue scenes. As the Titanic rapidly fills with water, Rose desperately searches for something that can free Jack, who has been handcuffed to a pipe. She discovers an emergency fire axe locked behind a glass case. Without hesitation, she smashes the glass and grabs the axe. At first, everything looks perfectly normal, but the very next shots reveal something strange. The shattered glass that Rose just destroyed suddenly appears almost intact again. A large section that had clearly been broken is mysteriously back in place. There is no additional impact, no explanation, and no scene showing anyone replacing it. Between edits, the broken display simply repairs itself. It's an incredibly subtle continuity error that lasts only moments. Yet once spotted, it's difficult to watch the sequence without noticing it every time. That same rescue scene contains another famous mistake. Rose raises the axe and swings toward Jack's handcuffs. The sequence is designed to create maximum suspense because one wrong hit could seriously injure him. However, careful viewers eventually noticed something unexpected. The axe bends. Instead of behaving like solid steel, the head visibly flexes upon impact. The reason is simple. The production used a rubber stunt prop to protect Leonardo DiCaprio during filming. Safety always comes first on movie sets, especially during scenes involving swinging weapons. The problem wasn't the rubber prop itself. The problem was that audiences could actually see it bending on camera. For a brief second, the life-or-death tension disappears because the weapon suddenly looks more like a toy than an emergency rescue tool. As dramatic as the flooding scenes appear, they contain even more continuity problems. One sequence shows enormous waves crashing through a row of windows as seawater tears through the ship. The destruction looks chaotic, but when different camera angles are compared, the order in which the windows break suddenly changes. In one shot, the water bursts through 3 windows before reaching the 4th. Moments later, another angle shows the same windows breaking in an entirely different order. This happened because multiple takes of the flooding sequence were edited together. Each version looked spectacular individually, but combining them created a small inconsistency in how the water moved through the room. Most audiences never notice because everything happens so quickly. Another blink-and-you'll-miss-it mistake appears when Jack first enters the luxurious first-class section of the ship. The polished glass doors create an elegant transition as he walks into Rose's world. Unfortunately, shiny surfaces have always been one of filmmaking's biggest challenges. For just a moment, the reflection reveals something that definitely shouldn't exist inside the Titanic. The cameraman. Instead of seeing only Jack's reflection, viewers can briefly spot camera equipment reflected in the glass. It's a classic filmmaking accident caused by reflective surfaces catching the production crew. Considering Titanic was one of the most expensive films ever produced at the time, it's surprising that such a noticeable reflection survived the final edit. Costume continuity also creates an amusing error during Jack's rescue. Earlier in the sequence, Jack is clearly wearing suspenders over his shirt while chained to the pipe. Rose finally swings the axe. The handcuffs break, and suddenly the suspenders have disappeared. Then, after another quick cut, they magically return. The explanation is fairly straightforward. Some shots were performed using stunt doubles rather than Leonardo DiCaprio himself. During filming, the wardrobe wasn't perfectly matched between takes, allowing Jack's suspenders to vanish and reappear within seconds. It's exactly the kind of mistake most people overlook until someone freezes the movie frame by frame. Kate Winslet's character also has an unusual continuity problem involving one of her facial features. Rose's famous beauty mark seems to move from one side of her face to the other throughout different scenes. Obviously, moles don't relocate overnight. The reason is that certain shots were flipped horizontally during editing to improve visual flow. While reversing the image solved one cinematic problem, it accidentally shifted every feature on Rose's face to the opposite side. Once viewers become aware of it, the moving beauty mark becomes surprisingly distracting. The sinking scenes introduce another production secret that wasn't supposed to be visible. As passengers slide down the steep decks and fall toward the freezing Atlantic, many actors were secured with hidden safety wires. Normally, these cables are removed during post-production, but in a handful of frames, they remain visible. If the scene is paused at exactly the right moment, thin support wires can be seen attached to performers during dangerous falls. Considering the enormous practical effects involved in recreating the disaster, it's understandable that a few frames escaped cleanup. Still, seeing stunt equipment briefly appear reminds audiences just how much work went into creating these unforgettable sequences. Not every mistake in Titanic involves editing or props. Some involve history itself. One memorable dinner conversation features Rose making a sarcastic joke about Sigmund Freud. She cleverly teases that Freud's ideas regarding men's obsession with size might explain why the ship was named Titanic. It's a sharp, witty line that perfectly fits her personality. There's just one issue. Those specific Freudian theories hadn't become publicly established by 1912. Rose is essentially referencing psychological ideas that would only become widely known after the Titanic disaster had already taken place. It's an example of modern knowledge being inserted into an earlier historical period for the sake of clever dialogue. Most viewers never question it because the joke works so well. Historical fashion creates another subtle inaccuracy. Rose is frequently shown wearing bright, elegant red lipstick that perfectly complements her rebellious personality. The makeup certainly looks beautiful on screen. However, upper-class women in 1912 generally avoided such bold cosmetics. Heavy lipstick was more commonly associated with actresses and stage performers rather than wealthy society women. Rose's glamorous makeup gives her a stronger visual identity for modern audiences, but historically, it would have been considered unusually daring for someone of her social standing. Despite that small inaccuracy, the filmmakers likely chose style over strict historical realism because it helped define her independent character from the very beginning. And these are only the first few hidden details. The biggest continuity mistakes, historical inaccuracies, disappearing objects, impossible timelines, and one famous drawing scene that changes before your eyes are still ahead. The visual effects in Titanic were revolutionary for their time, helping transform the film into one of the biggest cinematic achievements ever made. In 1997, audiences had never seen anything quite like James Cameron's enormous recreation of the famous ocean liner. But technology has evolved. Watching the film today on high-definition screens reveals a few digital shortcuts that weren't obvious decades ago. Several wide shots of the ship actually feature a detailed miniature rather than a full-size set. To make the vessel appear crowded, computer-generated passengers were added across the decks. At normal speed, the illusion works beautifully. Slow the footage down, however, and some of those digital figures begin moving in oddly repetitive patterns. Their walking animations appear stiff, and a few even seem to glide unnaturally across the deck without convincing weight or shadows. The same issue appears during several scenes where passengers fall from the sinking ship. Some digital bodies tumble with movements that feel strangely weightless, reminding modern viewers just how early computer animation still was in the late 1990s. One of the film's most memorable romantic scenes also hides an amusing production mistake. When Rose enters Jack's cabin for the famous drawing sequence, everything feels intimate and perfectly staged. But if you watch the door carefully, you'll notice something unusual. Rose never actually opens it herself. For a split second, an unseen hand from inside the room appears to pull the door open before disappearing out of frame. Most likely it belonged to a crew member helping coordinate the shot, yet the hand remained visible in the finished film. It lasts less than a second, but it's enough to make one of Hollywood's most iconic scenes unexpectedly funny. The production designers also made several deliberate changes to the ship itself. Although Cameron recreated Titanic with extraordinary accuracy, some areas were adjusted to improve dramatic storytelling. The grand staircase, for example, was inspired by the original but wasn't an exact copy. Certain dimensions were altered to better accommodate cameras and actors. Other sections of the ship were opened up visually to create more elegant compositions, even though the real Titanic contained narrower passageways and more enclosed spaces. These weren't accidental mistakes. They were artistic decisions that balanced historical authenticity with cinematic storytelling. Early in the movie, another continuity problem quietly slips by. As Titanic prepares to leave port, hundreds of people wave excitedly from the dock. The atmosphere feels alive with movement. Then the film cuts to another wide shot. The crowd has almost completely disappeared. The dock suddenly looks empty despite only seconds passing within the story. Different filming methods and separate shooting days likely created the inconsistency, but unless someone points it out, most audiences remain completely absorbed in the emotional farewell. Another tiny continuity error occurs during Rose's confrontation with Cal. The scene becomes physical, ending with Cal suffering what appears to be a fresh injury. Except careful viewers notice something odd. The fake blood is already visible on his hand before the impact that supposedly causes it. Only afterward does he touch his face and reveal the injury. It's a classic makeup continuity mistake that happened because separate takes weren't perfectly matched during editing. Near the film's heartbreaking conclusion, another small detail appears. Jack's face changes dramatically between close-up shots. One moment his nose appears wet but otherwise normal. In the next angle, a noticeable clump of frost suddenly hangs beneath it. The ice wasn't gradually forming throughout the scene, it simply appears between edits. Since the emotional ending required filming over multiple days with different makeup applications, maintaining identical frost effects proved more difficult than expected. Even the ship's flashlights introduce an unexpected historical problem. During the frantic search for Jack and Rose, officers carry bright white beams that illuminate dark hallways with remarkable clarity. Modern viewers probably think nothing of it. Yet flashlights available in 1912 produced much warmer, dimmer light than the brilliant beams shown in the movie. The production team likely chose brighter lighting simply because it allowed audiences to follow the action more easily. Historical accuracy lost out to visual clarity. Not every famous moment in Titanic could have happened quite the way the movie presents it. The romance between Jack and Rose is the emotional heart of the story, but strict class divisions aboard the real Titanic made such encounters extremely unlikely. First-class and third-class passengers occupied almost completely separate worlds. They ate separately, they slept separately, they traveled through different corridors and staircases. Crossing those boundaries required far more than simply wandering around the ship. The movie intentionally bends historical reality because the romance depends on bringing two completely different lives together. One fascinating historical detail appears near the ending when Rose arrives in New York. The Statue of Liberty is shown with the familiar green color everyone recognizes today. There's only one problem. In 1912, the famous monument had not yet developed the fully green appearance seen today. Its copper surface was still transitioning, producing a mixture of brown and partially oxidized green tones, rather than the uniform color portrayed in the film. It may seem insignificant, but history enthusiasts quickly noticed the difference. Jack also unknowingly tells a story that couldn't possibly be true. Early in the movie, he recalls ice fishing on Lake Wissota while trying to comfort Rose. It's a touching moment that reveals his adventurous background. Except Lake Wissota didn't exist yet. The reservoir wasn't created until several years after the Titanic sank in 1912. Whether it was a simple oversight by the writers or an unnoticed historical error, the timeline doesn't quite add up. Art lovers discovered another hidden inconsistency. Rose proudly mentions owning valuable paintings, including a famous work by Pablo Picasso. The painting certainly fits her progressive personality. Unfortunately, that specific artwork had not even been completed at the time the Titanic sailed. Several pieces displayed during the film either didn't yet exist or were never actually aboard the real ship. The filmmakers clearly wanted Rose to appear ahead of her time, even if that meant quietly bending the historical record. Finally, we arrive at perhaps the most surprising continuity mistake in the entire film: the famous portrait. As Jack begins sketching Rose, viewers clearly see him make a bold first line across the paper. The stroke is thick and highly visible. Later, when the finished drawing is shown, that original line has completely disappeared. Instead, the portrait contains delicate, carefully blended pencil work with no trace of the heavy opening mark. The explanation is simple. Leonardo DiCaprio wasn't actually creating the final masterpiece shown on screen. The completed portrait had been prepared separately by a professional artist, while the drawing sequence itself was filmed purely for dramatic effect. Most viewers never compare the beginning of the sketch with the completed artwork. Those who do immediately notice that the first line mysteriously vanishes between cuts. And that's what makes Titanic so fascinating. Even one of the greatest films ever produced contains hidden mistakes, overlooked continuity errors, historical inaccuracies, and production secrets waiting to be discovered. None of them diminish the emotional power of James Cameron's masterpiece. If anything, they remind us that filmmaking, even at its highest level, is still a human process. Perfection may have been the goal, but tiny imperfections found their way into the final cut. Decades later, those little bloopers continue giving fans new reasons to revisit one of cinema's most unforgettable classics, proving that even after countless viewings, Titanic can still surprise us with details we never noticed before.